Last week, I covered Achievers' new release of their 2020 Engagement and Retention Report, which concluded that as many as 64% of employees may be thinking about jumping ship and leaving their jobs in 2020. One of the main reasons that Achievers came to this conclusion is because people are feeling undervalued, unappreciated at work, not giving enough positive feedback in their day. Now, here's the thing about feedback, and I wrote about this in Forbes a while ago, last March. In fact, I wrote about why giving feedback at work doesn't improve performance. Now, I'm not going to go through this entire article, but I do want to lay kind of a baseline for why this positive feedback is so important by thinking about what happens to our brain when we're given feedback at work. So I want to read this section here, your brain on feedback. Logically, getting feedback at work is not life-threatening. Even if the worst possible thing happens in employment terms and you lose your job immediately after receiving feedback, you're still alive and kicking, able to get up, dust yourself off, go find another job tomorrow. Sadly, most people have not developed the ability to receive constructive criticism without also feeling anxiety. That means that when you're in the moment, when you're actually receiving that feedback, your brain doesn't know the difference between getting a piece of feedback and being in a life or death situation. It really doesn't. And because it doesn't know the difference, it responds and acts accordingly. What does this mean for the person giving the feedback? Assuming your goal is to improve the person's performance rather than merely hear yourself talk, you are running a fool's errand. And I just want to stop right there for a half a second because I really do fundamentally think that a lot of people go into these constructive feedback conversations without having the clear intention in mind of actually improving performance. They're giving the feedback because maybe it makes them feel better, maybe it makes them feel powerful, maybe it means that they can go into HR and say, well, I gave this person feedback, I coached them on this thing. They're not necessarily keeping that desired end goal in mind, though. The goal of feedback should always be to change behavior. And so you have to ask yourself, is what I'm doing, is how I'm articulating that feedback actually going to improve the person's overall performance? This is the crux of the question. Are my efforts going to result in tangible changes to this person's behavior that are positive and that are going to produce more for the organization? Now, you may be coming from a genuinely good place of wanting to help. I don't necessarily think that when people are going into these conversations, they are consciously saying, I'm just going to tell this person what's what because it makes me feel good. This is all happening on a subconscious basis, folks. We are not 99% of the time, we are not consciously aware of the real reasons why we are doing something, our real motivations, because there is a lot of activity going on in our brain that we are not consciously aware of. So you may be coming from a genuinely good place of wanting to help them, but that doesn't mean that the person receiving the feedback is open to receiving that guidance. At the moment the person you're offering the feedback to understands that you're about to deliver a negative or critical piece of feedback, their sympathetic nervous system lights up like a Christmas tree. They've actually done brain scans on people. They've had them wear little helmets and have scanned what happens in their brain simply when they hear the word feedback. Sympathetic nervous system goes ding, 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 ding. Bad, 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 bad. Survival, survival, survival. That's what the sympathetic nervous system is. That's the body's way of preparing itself for intense physical activity, or the type of activity you need if you were about to either engage in a fight, an actual physical fight, or run away from a threat. In doing so, it impairs the person's ability to thoughtfully receive and consider the feedback you're offering. Their brain literally can't handle it. Another word for, or term rather, for the sympathetic nervous system lighting up is fight or flight. That's what happens as part of our survival mechanism when we perceive something it's going to cause us pain. we get all revved up and we usually either do one of two things. We either try to fight it aggressively or we try to turn and run away in the other direction, right? Sometimes people throw freeze into this as well, whereas we just like kind of freeze up and we don't say anything. There's a debate about whether or not it should be included in this specific category, but even if it is, it doesn't actually make a difference for the point that I'm making here, which is the person's brain is not primed to receive that feedback. In other words, they're not even going to hear you. They're not going to be able to process it. It is not going to result, because if a person can't process that information, it is not going to result in the behavior change that you are ultimately shooting for. And that's why giving critical feedback has been shown time and time again to have very little correlation to improving performance. Even if the person receiving the feedback looks fine on the outside, their brain almost always just isn't in the right state to adequately receive, process, consider, and apply the input because of all the resources have been directed to the singular task of getting them away from the situation in which they perceive as dangerous or painful. I have some other stuff in this article too. You're more than welcome to Google it, check it out if you want to read more on that. But I bring this up because in considering the achievers information from last week, clearly we need to do a better job on reframing how we're giving feedback at work, particularly if you're in a leadership position, in a position of managing people. We need to start upping our game. Now, I went to Harvard Business Review, and I think this is just fascinating. I went to Harvard Business Review, and I looked under their section on giving feedback. Guess what? Almost every single article in this section is about how to give negative feedback. Let's just scroll down the list here. Giving feedback to someone who hasn't had it in years. I mean, that doesn't sound too positive. Give your colleague the rating he deserves or the one he wants. That doesn't sound too positive. There's a couple on that. Are you sugarcoating your feedback without realizing it? Why would you need to sugarcoat your feedback if it wasn't negative? Asking for advice is more effective than asking for feedback. That's actually probably a good one. I bet you that mirrors what David Rock's research is, which is essentially what he's done. And his research is actually fascinating. He's actually found that if people ask for feedback, even if you're in a situation where, like, say, I'm the boss and I'm talking to you and you're the employee and I say, ask me for feedback. And you say, can you give me feedback on this thing? It actually primes the brain differently. Asking for the advice does something, it like flips a switch where you are actually more open to receiving the feedback at that point, even if, it's still going to be negative. It's the act of asking that primes us to get kind of ready for it without going into that fight or flight response. Let's keep going. How leaders can ask for feedback no one wants to give them. Why would no one want to give you feedback if it was positive? Instant feedback hurts our performance. Well, that might be one I do on a different day. I don't necessarily agree with that. The assumption employees make when they don't get feedback. What good feedback really looks like. Oh my God, they actually have an article on this. What good feedback really looks like. Let's pull that one up. I might look at that one in conjunction with this other one that I want to look at. How asking people for advice can backfire. Research confirms receiving bad news, we shoot the messenger. Well, obviously. So you can see what I'm going for here. You can scroll down this list of articles, all the articles in the giving feedback category, and most of them, the vast majority of them, have an overtly negative bent. This is why feedback has such a bad reputation in the office, because we are not giving out enough positive feedback. It is just not happening. This is part of what the Achievers study found, is that people are not receiving the positive recognition that they feel like they deserve, or even a good job or like a pat on the back. They don't feel valued. They don't feel appreciated. And that's why they're thinking about leaving their job. So I do have that another article that I want to pull up and look at, and this article goes back to 2016. The reason I pulled up this article specifically is it's by Christine Porath, who I really appreciate. Christine Porath has written a lot about civility at work and kind of elevating the conversation. I don't believe I agree with everything that she says, but I think she makes some really clear and effective points. All right, I want to scroll down a little bit though. So I don't want to do okay. Offering positive feedback can generate wins for managers too. Actually, maybe we go up. No, basically, like what the first article says is, or the first paragraph is like positive feedback, good, thumbs up. High performers offer more positive feedback to their peers. In fact, high-performing teams share nearly 6 times more positive feedback than average teams. Meanwhile, low-performing teams share nearly twice as much negative feedback than average teams. I completely agree with these stats. Listen, what I've mentioned sometimes in these videos before, one of the things I do is I actually go into organizations and measure the resiliency of their working groups. How likely are they to be able to overcome obstacles, get back up when they've been dealt a setback? How effective are they at working together? Are they cohesive? Are they communicating? All these things that go into creating a highly resilient team. Now, one of the areas we specifically look at is communication. Do people trust one another? Are they able to express what's on their mind? Are they able to express both the good and the bad? And also we look at attitude. Are people committed to being a member of this team? Are they committed to helping each other, to serving each other? Or are they just kind of coming in and phoning it in every single day? So what we're seeing here is that high-performing teams are supporting each other. They're lifting each other up. They're more likely to share that positive feedback than low-performing teams, which are more likely to share negative feedback. Completely makes sense. Consider which of your team members' positive contributions you currently take for granted. Make a list. Start calling out team members for their strengths when you see them in action, and try to catch people at it in the moment. That's why I disagree with that other article that we found in that list. I might go back and take a closer look at that one, because I do think it's important to catch people in the moment. I don't think that positive feedback is something that you should delay until like the performance review. That means that you're probably only giving people positive feedback, once a year? Maybe 4 times a year if you're doing like continuous performance improvement. We need positive feedback more often than a couple of times a year. That again, this is about making sure people feel valued, making sure their efforts are appreciated. And no, I don't care if they're just doing their job. People still need that positive reinforcement. A paycheck is not enough to thank people for putting their energy and attention into something. Because listen, just big picture, most people, if you just look at the outlines of their job descriptions, they can come in and phone it in all day and do about 2.5 hours of work a day. And for some people, for lower performing disengaged people, that's about the amount of work they're doing. They're doing a couple hours of work per day. What if we could get people to not only do the base level of their job, but also, shocking, go outside of their job description, approach different problems in new creative ways, solve problems that are plaguing productivity and results in your business, that go above and beyond the call of duty, really giving their all to it, really giving their energy and attention. Which would you rather have? That person that's coming in and phoning it in and doing the bare minimum to meet the outlines of their job description, or the person who's really coming in and going the extra mile? I would hope most of you would say the latter. In order to do that, we need to make sure they know that their efforts are appreciated. The more you notice what's meaningful to a person, the greater the potential impact will be. Some people prefer a pat on the back in private. Others want to bask in the glory of a crowd. If you don't tend to give much feedback, start scheduling one-on-one meetings. This is the other thing I talked about in that engagement and retention report, which is we are finding that that managers are not having these one-on-one meetings nearly as frequently as they should be. Tell each individual what you want them to see them start, stop, and continue doing. I don't know about this strategy. I agree with one-on-one meetings, but this is kind of what she's talking about here is kind of muddling together negative and positive feedback. I think there's a time and a place for that, but I also think that if you're giving negative feedback alongside positive feedback, oftentimes the negative feedback can kind of cancel out any positive impact of that positive feedback. Because again, Remember, going back to our survival mechanism, if we have a piece of negative and a piece of positive, our brain is wired to focus more attention on the negative because the negative is going to hurt us and we want to run away from it. We don't want that pain to happen. So we want people to focus on the positive, but just we're always fighting that biology, that survival mechanism of they're going to focus more attention on the negative. Therefore, something that's negative is going to have a greater overall impact on their psychological state of mind than something that's positive. That's why we need to give out more positive feedback, much more than negative feedback. See if you can list a few straightforward actions for each of these prompts. You may ask one employee to start speaking up and sharing their ideas in a meeting and stop being critical if they don't voice their concerns during the production process. You might compliment them on their creative design ideas and their efforts mentoring employees. Let your employee know that you appreciate these efforts and that you'd love to see them continue doing these specifics. This I completely agree with. If your employees are doing good things, that are producing good results, or just part of the process that you want to see integrated into the work environment, you have to let them know. People assume all the time that if you're not giving positive feedback, people do not make the assumption that you're doing something good or that they're doing something that you appreciate. You have to tell them. You have to tell them, yes, this is great. Keep doing it. Good job. There are several things you can do to make feedback even more powerful and productive. Try to identify the recipient of the feedback and understand the emotions he or she may be feeling. In a straightforward and honest way, explain the reason for the feedback. Imagine you're giving yourself the feedback. How would you want to hear it? Make sure to focus on the future. What can your employees do moving forward? I think that I in general agree with a lot of this. I think it can be a little bit dangerous to imagine you're giving the feedback to yourself because here's the thing, and she actually hits on this earlier in the article. She says that some people, let's see. It was, where she said that some people prefer here it is. Some people prefer a pat on the back in private. Others want to bask in the glory of a crowd. This is a work style issue. That has to do with what work style are they bringing to work. I talk a lot about DISC, how we can use DISC effectively in different situations. Now, there are DISC profiles that will tell you, I don't need positive. You don't need to give me a pat on the back. They're liars. What they don't want is public recognition. And then there are some DISC profiles that you put a spotlight on them, you bring them up on a stage and give them an award or a gold star. Oh, you've made their year. It's their favorite thing ever. So the point I'm trying to make here is that just because you might like to receive feedback in a certain way, that does not mean that that is going to apply to your team members. Okay, so you have to make sure you really understand the different work styles of your team members to not give feedback in the way that you want to receive it, but to give feedback in the way that they want to receive it. That's really important. Pay attention to the facial expressions when you're delivering feedback. How you say things is just as important as what you're saying. That's very, very true. Okay, let's scroll down here a little bit more. How deeply do you understand your ability to give feedback well? To gain self-awareness, solicit others' help using these strategies. Okay, so this is about asking for feedback, making sure you're receiving feedback, all that good stuff. So there's some good stuff in this article. I do want to go over to what good feedback really looks like, though, because this actually hits on what we need to be doing, it seems like. And I haven't read this article. This is totally impromptu, so we're just going to see how this goes. According to a recent Harvard Business Review cover story, it's rarely useful to give feedback to colleagues. The authors argue that constructive criticism won't help people excel, and that when you highlight someone's shortcomings, you actually hinder their learning. They say that managers should encourage employees to worry less about their weaknesses and focus on their strengths. This is exactly what I was talking about in my Why Giving Feedback at Work Doesn't Improve Performance articles, because you're not focusing on how people are receiving the feedback. Our research and experience at the Center for Creative Leadership led us to a different conclusion. Feedback, both positive and negative, is essential to helping managers enhance their best qualities and address the worst so they can excel at leading. There are several ideas in the article which we agree with. Harsh feedback does not help people thrive and excel. Positive feedback is critical for learning. Telling someone how to fix a problem is often the wrong approach. Let's look at this one. You'll foster more learning by asking questions that stimulate reflection and coaching people into exploration and experimentation. Yes, 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 yes. So, asking questions. So, feedback and coaching are fundamentally different. Let's take a step back. Feedback and coaching are not the same thing. Okay, they're not. Giving feedback is a one-way conversation. It is setting the expectation for future behavior. Coaching is a two-way conversation, right? It is a dialogue. It is a back and forth. That's where asking questions comes in. You're getting people to self-reflect or come to their own conclusions about something. However, we disagree with other points. People are unreliable assessors of others and thus give feedback that is more distortion than truth. I don't know if I disagree with that. Let's see what they have to say. Feedback is never purely objective since it is delivered from a human being with a unique perspective. Yes. However, for a leader, knowing how others see and experience her is incredibly valuable since these people make decisions based on their perceptions. Decisions about who to listen to, cooperate with, trust, support, and promote. I don't disagree with any of what they're saying, but I don't actually think that disputes the point, which is that people are often unreliable assessors of other people. I don't think that they actually disagree with this. They're just making a different point. Feedback about weaknesses creates a threat to inhibit learning. So they're countering by saying research indicates that 360-degree feedback recipients who get unfavorable ratings tend to improve their performance more than others. In CCL's work, we found successful executives credit all type of potentially threatening events, horrible bosses, making a business mistake, being demoted, and firing employees as key drivers of their development. I tend to question where that research, the extent, like the extent of that research. Does performance improve following multi-source feedback, a theoretical model, meta-analysis, and review of empirical findings? Okay, we reviewed evidence showing that multi-source feedback ratings are related to other measures of leadership effectiveness and that different rater sources conceptualize performance in a similar manner. Then we described a meta-analysis of 24 longitudinal studies that improve a direct peer, blah, 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 blah. I don't think that this research says what they think it says. I'm not going to go through this research. Gosh, you would be bored to tears. I'm bored to tears even reading the abstract. Specifically, improvement is most likely to occur when feedback indicates that change is necessary. Recipients have positive feedback orientation, perceive a need to change their behavior, and react positively to the feedback, believe change is feasible, set appropriate goals. Okay, I don't think this research, they have not summed up this research well. I can already tell you, I don't even need to read the article, I can already tell you that this is jumping to a conclusion that I don't think they're being malicious. Let me say that. But I think that they've jumped to a conclusion that is actually significantly more complicated than they are making it out to be in a sentence. I mean, listen, look at this article. This article is long. Let's look at their methodology for a second. They did a literature search, inclusion criteria, non-independence. This article is much more complicated than what they're making it out to be. So, listen, I'm not saying that I'm certain there are 360 feedback recipients who get unfavorable ratings and tend to improve more than others. I guess my question here is, like, how many people are actually consistently giving feedback through a 360-degree model? That should not be the way in which we are giving feedback. And there are some 360-degree models that are beautiful models that actually are designed and built with the specific purpose of engaging people in this feedback and making the feedback constructive. So there are some wonderful 360s out there, but that's not how most people are getting feedback at work. So I don't know that that's necessarily applicable to what we're talking about here. People should just focus on their strengths. So they're criticizing this. Our work has shown that ignoring one's weaknesses is one of the greatest contributors to individual derailment in organizations. No matter how well tuned a leader's strengths are, one unaddressed fatal flaw, Arrogance, inability to build a team, or difficulty adapting to a new context can lead to failure, particularly if it's unacknowledged by the individuals. I mean, I would be interested. So they're saying that their research says this, but they aren't providing any evidence. They aren't providing stuff for us to look at. This is why you always have to be skeptical of people saying, well, research says. I mean, look at the research that they're citing. And listen, I'm guilty of this too. Oftentimes when I'm writing a piece, I don't necessarily have the time or frankly the inclination to go back and cite all the different empirical studies that I've looked at. And, a lot of times I'm aggregating different types of behaviors together based on my perspective, my experience, my expertise in organizations. Listen, but you should always question me too. Question me when people are saying research says, well, what research? Point me to the research. Don't just jump on their conclusions because it's exactly, it fits the story you want to tell at that given time. You can best help your organization by getting better at things you are really good at. This assumes that everyone is already good at the right things. No, it doesn't! They have critical skills and competencies that organizations need to succeed. Our colleague Jean Leslie's research demonstrates that is rarely the case. In fact, she found that leaders are weakest in 4 of the most important leadership skills: inspiring commitment, leading employees, strategic planning, and change management. I don't disagree with that at all. I think that that's probably pretty accurate. But I also disagree that this assumes anything. That's one perspective. So let's see. It looks like in this article, this is the part of the problem with Harvard Business Review is like they label something what good feedback really looks like, and then they never actually tell you what good feedback really looks like. So I guess the moral of the story here is that, we've got a couple strategies for outlining the need to give out more positive feedback. Listen. Giving out positive feedback is not actually that hard. It's really not. It's really not. Just give it. Just give it. Good job. I appreciated your effort. Man, when you presented in that meeting, you did a wonderful job. You helped people to understand what we're trying to do. Really, I particularly liked this. Really, really great work. Why do we struggle so much to give out positive feedback? Is it just practice? It might just be practice. That would be something that I'd be interested in looking up. It's just practice. The more you practice it, like what is the worst thing that can happen if you said good job to someone? I don't think anyone needs to go out and read a book about how to give out positive feedback. Just start saying good things. Just start. What I loved in a Christine Prass article is she says at some point, consider which of your team members' positive contributions you currently take for granted. What aren't you giving them the thank you or the good job or I really appreciate your effort on? What aren't you giving them those pieces of feedback on that you could be? Look for opportunities. Look for opportunities every single day to give out this positive feedback. It is not going to hurt you. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to make you a pushover as a boss. It's not going to do any of these things, but it could help your team feel more valued. It could help your team feel more appreciated. And that's going to make sure that their engagement levels are higher, and it's going to make sure you're not going to lose them when 64% of the employees may be leaving their jobs this year. Listen, folks, it is a job seeker's market. It really, really is. If people want to leave their job, chances are they can go find a better one that's going to pay them more money. Truly. And it might not be better from the perspective of getting more positive feedback because we don't know. Most managers are really bad at doing this. But if you aren't going to start trying, then what case can you make that you should be the ones holding on to these employees? What's your case? I don't understand. If we can't say thank you, if we can't say a simple thank you, then why should any of your team members come in and go the extra mile? So, if you want super simple advice about how to give positive feedback, just start giving it. Truly, just start. And maybe you don't know exactly how to do it now. Maybe it makes you feel uncomfortable, but that's really not the point. And it is not about you. It is not about you. It's about them. It's about engaging your team members. And you do it because it's the right thing to do.